Well, good morning and welcome to the Camilla Tominey Show. We haven't boycotted ourselves. We are here. We will be providing commentary. We will be analysing the news. And what we'll be doing is doing it in a nuanced way. Because as you know and I know, you can't discuss immigration policy in 140 characters or less on Twitter. You have to do it by asking people the relevant questions, discussing things and not branding people who disagree with you Nazis. And that's the joy of GBNews, folks, because we are the People's Channel after all. Now, before I introduce my newspaper guest, let me just go through the headlines, which, as you can imagine, are dominated by Lineker. So here we are. First of all, the Sunday Telegraph. I have got the Sunday Telegraph, but I haven't got the Sunday Telegraph on the prompter, so I'll look down to it. "I won't quit," says BBC boss as he hints at climb down. Now, this is quite interesting because the Sunday Times initially did Lineker chaos piles pressure on BBC chief, but then it changed up to this story, which we will get into because I think this is kind of gaining momentum as the day goes on. Fears of global tech chaos as bank collapses. So we'll be discussing that in just a minute. The Observer again goes with the sports pundit. Lineker row threatens to topple BBC chief and hit asylum plan, suggesting that perhaps the government's plan on all this could be scuppered by the intervention of the Match of the Day host. The Mirror, Lineker, "I'll never be silenced," he says. Then in the Sunday Express, again, are you noting a current theme, a running theme of the Sunday papers today? BBC Sport blackout. The Mail on Sunday goes with PM hits back in Lineker storm. That's after Rishi Sunak released a statement about it all yesterday night. And then in the Sun on Sunday, we have penalty shootout, which is probably quite a good way to describe the to and fro between Lineker and the BBC, which looks set to continue into tomorrow as Lineker's people get together with Tim Davie to work out a solution. Now, I'm delighted this morning to be joined by Michael Crick, legendary political journalist, but also massive football fan, so we can pour through this particular story. Now, I know when we say to you, come in and do the papers, and normally we've got a great deal of variety on the front pages. Not so much this morning, Michael. There's only one story in town on this Sunday, isn't there, really?
And it's extraordinary. It is an apparently trivial story in some ways. And, at a time when huge economic problems, Ukraine, everything, this is dominating the front pages. But it is actually an important story. And it's a showdown which, in my view, the BBC, the Director General of the BBC, Tim Davie, has to win. He has to lay down the principle that somebody who is the BBC's highest paid employee on 1.3 million pounds a year cannot simply tweet as he feels like on a huge matter of public policy, possibly the big issue for the general election, the whole question of small boats and immigration. And certainly if it's not the issue, it'll be one of the major issues. And the trouble is both sides have painted themselves into a corner, really. Gary Lineker has made it clear that he's not going to be silenced. He's going to carry on saying these things. And Tim Davie has made it clear that he's got to stop saying these things. And if Davie backs down on this, I think he's going to have to go as Director General. His authority will be shot through. And I think it's very unlikely that Gary Lineker will back down because he clearly feels very passionately about this whole issue.
Do you have any understanding for this argument, because you're a former BBC man yourself and obviously a journalist, that there are different rules for BBC journalists than there might be for BBC sports pundits?
Yes, of course, I can understand that. The trouble with this, though, is that Lineker is, arguably the most prominent member of BBC staff in a way, even though technically he's freelance. He's certainly the most well paid. And I just think if you turned it round and if the presenter of the Match of the Day had said, full marks to the government, I fully support, sending everybody back who's come over in the small boats, you can imagine the outcry that would have caused amongst BBC staff and calling for him to lose his job. So there's a lot of hypocrisy going on here, and basically people are lining up depending on what their own political views are. My position is that you have to preserve broadcasting impartiality, particularly with the main terrestrial channels like the BBC, because broadcasting impartiality is one of the things, in my view, which binds this country together at a time when people want to tear the country country apart in a way, and our discourse has become more and more polarised.
And if you had tweeted what he tweeted when you were political editor of Newsnight, you'd have expected to be fired the very next morning, wouldn't you?
Exactly. Although you could say political editor of Newsnight, that's a different kind of job from being presenter of Match of the Day. But I do think that Tim Davie is right to crack down on Lineker. After all, he made a return, really, to proper impartiality and the maintenance of impartiality, a main plank of his Director Generalship. It's really important to him. And he's had some success so far, and one or two people have, frankly, been got rid of.
Yes.
And if he doesn't win this battle, then it's going to be very, very difficult to discipline anybody at a lower level, a reporter or somebody who works for Radio Lincolnshire or something, who comes out with political statements on social media, which, of course, is the easiest thing in the world to do, particularly when you're drunk late at night.
No, that's right.
Not that I'm suggesting that Lineker did this when he was drunk.
Although, yeah, we should never tweet drunk. We know that much, Michael. Now, what else is in the papers? What was interesting was that the Sunday Times changed up their Lineker story to this story about this Silicon Valley bank in the US. Is this actually bigger than the papers today have covered? It seems to be growing in...
Well, I think it should have had more coverage in the papers, and the problem, as you well know, with Sunday papers is they tend to go to bed, go to press, quite early, and the Sunday Times, rightly in my view, has given it attention. I don't think this is another Northern Rock, but there are clearly that we know there have been talks between emergency talks, really, between Andrew Bailey, the Governor of the Bank of England, the Chancellor Jeremy Hunt, and Rishi Sunak over the weekend about this, and that shows the extent to which they're worried about it. And of course, ahead of the budget on Wednesday, and Jeremy Hunt and Sunak want to turn Britain into a technological superpower. And the trouble is, with the collapse of the British arm of this bank, is that there are technology companies that have their money with that bank, who have thousands of employees. It could be a severe blow to the high-tech industry, and the government is going to have to come up with some kind of package, really, to save them. But I don't think that we're going to see I mean, I'm not an economic expert, but I don't think we're talking about, from what I can gather, a run on the banks and the kind of financial crisis that we saw way back in 2008 to 9.
Will there be a public appetite for another bank bailout by the government? I don't think
Well, I think it would be pretty small scale.
Yes.
And really, it's not so much a bank bailout as a sort of a lifeboat for the people who are dependent, the companies that are dependent on this bank to run their businesses.
I'm having Liam Halligan on later and Lord Billamoria, so they will be able to discuss this in greater detail.
Well, they'll probably talk about it much more sensibly than I've done.
The head of the budget. Yeah, I don't like... This is the trouble with journalists, Michael. We are functionally enumerate most of the time. This is the trouble with economic stories.
We're generalists a lot of the time as well, aren't we? Yeah.
Now, another under-the-radar story of the weekend is, of course, this doctors' strike, which is taking place next week. Again, it's not front-page news, but it probably should be.
I think so, yeah. I mean, it's hardly covered on the inside pages either. I mean, you've got up on screen there the Mail on Sunday account of it. They're fairly hostile to the junior doctors, who are calling for a whopping 35% pay rise, which seems enormous, even with 10-11% inflation right now. But of course, they say that is purely to restore their pay to the levels of 2008 to 29, 15 years ago. And they do work extraordinary hours, and there are all sorts of pressures on them. Now, I mean, if the government is never going to concede a pay rise like that, but clearly the government is going to have to address this. I mean, it's a 3-day strike.
Yeah.
It's going to have a real effect on the health service. Emergency services, cancer appointments are going to have to be postponed.
But I'm wondering whether they have as much public support as, say, nurses, because I think there's probably a perception that even if junior, doctors are paid pretty well. I mean, I know they're saying that they want 35% more, but most people look at it and go, 35% pay rise? I'm in the private sector, couldn't even get 5 of that 35%.
I know, but there is actually a poll in the Sunday Times today that suggests the public do actually support junior doctors on this. Now, that may change, and of course the crunch will come if we get stories over the next 3 days of this strike action of people who are, who die as a result of this, or are thought to have died.
emergency people not being seen in time.
It's the A&E people that are the real problem. And then, of course, if appointments are cancelled, it could mean that cancer patients are having to wait weeks until their appointment, or are they going to move everybody? So, I mean, the ramifications are huge. It's a big, big story. Again, in the run-up to the budget on Wednesday, when the Chancellor is going to have to start thinking about, you know, is he going to have enough money from somewhere to settle some of these pay disputes?
Yeah, not at 35%, I would.
Not at 35%.
But maybe at some percent.
Yeah, indeed.
Thank you very much indeed, Michael Crick, for joining me this morning. I hear you're off to the football later.
I am.
Might be in the stalls with Gary.
No, I don't think
he's not. Well, no, to be fair, you'll be at Manchester United. I don't think you're there. Right, thank you very much for that, Michael.